Greetings, techies and diving talkers. We have something very special for you today. Thank you, Arlindo. As you probably know, we're going to be making a deep dive into the world of exploration with some of the most prolific and storied explorers on the planet. I think it's fair to say that exploration occupies a unique and special place in the tech diving firmament. We could say that while military and public safety divers do it for the mission and commercial divers do it for work, tech divers do it to boldly go where no one has gone before, right? And you can blame this on our DRD4 7R wanderlust gene. And in fact, our genetic disposition to explore has enabled us to greatly expand our underwater envelope since the emergence of tech diving nearly 40 years ago. And the individuals on this panel have each played a significant and direct role in pushing that envelope deeper and longer. As I'm sure you gathered by now, I am not at Diving Talks, which I'm very sad about. A week ago today, I was involved in a car accident, and I was hospitalized, and I was just released 2 days ago. I'm grateful to be alive, and I'm on the mend, so those are good things. Fortunately, my dear friend, caveman Phil Short, who's a world-class explorer in his own right, will be leading this discussion debate panel. I'm excited about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Phil in a couple of minutes. Scoop booty, brother. And you can be sure I'm going to be watching. I can't wait to watch this panel. Very excited about it. So, of course, I got to make the requisite plug. So if you're not an in-depth reader, there's a free subscription card with a giveaway. We're giving away a copy of the original Aquacore Journal, a digital copy. So check out your swag bags around the tables and go from there. I hope we have a great panel. So sit back and enjoy it. Fasten up your harness and get ready to explore. Thank you.
So, Michael, from all of us here on the stage, you are an absolute pillar of our community. From Aquacore to in-depth, you have led the information dissemination in our community, and our hearts go out to you today. And we just want you to know that everybody here around the world has our arms wrapped around you and hope that your recovery is good and fast. And thanks for summoning the energy to introduce this panel. We love you.
Love you, man.
Absolutely.
Everyone turn towards the camera now and give Michael
wave to Mike.
Get well.
Hello, Michael.
Get well.
I can only mirror that Jill said. I mean, Mike was a real inspiration to me to move from recreational to technical through Aquacore and the conferences. I remember when those magazines came out, we sort of hoarded them greedily and traded them around like gold bars for the information within them before you could find that sort of stuff on the internet. So pretty inspirational. The first question I've got for my panel, who I'm very proud to say are all friends of mine and incredible explorers, is what was their first exploration and what motivated them to make that step from regular diving into an exploratory dive and their first exploration. So I think we'll start with you, Leigh, because I've known you the longest.
Okay. Well, my area of exploration is shipwrecks, and mainly virgin shipwrecks. So I think my first virgin shipwreck was in 1993. I'd been diving wrecks for a long time, but the first virgin wreck was that. And I think it was just the excitement and the thrill of it. So for many years throughout the 90s, I was diving virgin shipwrecks with a group of people. But the big proper exploration, I think, would have been the King Edward VII expedition in 1997. And that was the first sub 100 meter shipwreck exploration in Europe, effectively. And I think what drove me to do it was the fact that if I didn't do it, I wouldn't do it at all because no one else would organise the trip. So I just got off my back and organised it, really. And I think that's what drove me to do more of it as well. And the onset from that was we became a team and more people were helping organise things. So logistically, it came a lot easier. So I think it was the thrill of, when I say the King Edward VII, it was a huge battleship lying off the coast of Scotland that nobody had ever dived, nobody had ever seen. So the thrill of exploring something like that was fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, Incredible. And Nathalie?
I think, I started cave diving with, going along on expedition organized by others, but soon enough I was really interested into what was lying into the dark waters, because I'm always like, there's so many people looking for some stuff in the blue and comfortable waters, like, yeah, but what about all those body of waters that are so murky? It must be something there. So it's what drives me, and I was lucky enough to move to Quebec, and the St. Lawrence River in that part is a body of water where there's plenty of shipwrecks in challenging condition. And I think it was the mix of how can we understand the tides, the river, the condition, and make it possible to reach those wrecks that we know basically nothing about.
Yeah, thanks.
For me, my first big exploration really was 1995 when Dr. Bill Stone invited me to join the U.S. Deep Caving Team project in Huautla in Mexico. So that was quite a big jump into exploration. And I really have to credit him so much for his inspiration. For me, before that, it was really about going where no one had been before. And when I left that expedition, I really understood so much more acutely about the responsibility of exploration and how it was important to balance the risk, make sure it's worthwhile, but also to bring home the data and bring home everyone safely. So he really set the foundation for me and has remained an inspiration in my life since then.
I get that, totally. Jarrod?
Let's see, I started playing at exploration in Ginny Springs in the late 1980s, but I think that Manatee Springs, where we managed to start developing the cave penetration distances into the North American record at that time, was really impactful to me, because there were the sort of legends of diving that I had followed and looked up to, and then I started to say, okay, now we're doing the kind of dives that are at the distance of people who are doing amazing things, the Czech Exceles that I was following at the time. And then I would say, from a broad perspective, one I remember the most would be in 1995, where we did our first international expedition in Turkey, where everything was just, nobody had been even to the spring, and now we were getting in the cave and exploring from the very beginning. That's probably one of the things I remember the most, that there was no turning back after that. I might have been able to turn back before that, but there was no turning back.
So I'm not going to embarrass anyone, including myself, by asking ages, but I've just done a bit of crayon maths in my head, and I know that there is more than 100 years of active expedition exploration experience on the panel today, including myself, which is quite inspiring. So my next question is, how have you kept going? What has kept you in exploration, driven you to the next expedition? Because frankly, some of them are cold, wet, and miserable. Most of them are cold, wet, and miserable, actually. But what keeps you going? So, Leigh?
Okay, what keeps me going? Well, I'm very different to these guys over the other side of the panel here in terms of I'm a shipwreck explorer. So as I grow older, it's hard out there in the ocean. The ocean's moving. It's a tough thing to do, dive deep shipwrecks constantly all the time. And if I'm honest, what drives me, I've still got that thrill of exploration. The last dive I did was just off the scale fantastic, as it was when I first dived virgin shipwrecks in the early 90s. But if I'm honest, what keeps me going is the people and the friendship. Now, I've been with a group of people since the 90s, and we're all such good friends. And I always think that in diving, the best thing I've ever done in diving is the friendships and the people I've met all around the world. And I wouldn't have missed that for anything. So that really drives me. Okay, so I've had a career in the fire and rescue service. That was my job. And people say to me, do you miss the fire service? And I say, no, but I miss the people and colleagues that I worked with. And I strongly believe that at the end of when I hang up my fins one day, the thing I'll remember most is the people that I did it with and the friendships and the wonderful people that I met everywhere. Conferences, expeditions, dive boats and everything. So I think that's what keeps me going, being with my friends that are spread out all over the country. We unite, we come together as a team to share one common interest and explore shipwrecks that no one else has been before. I suppose you weren't expecting that answer, were you?
No, definitely. I mean, the whole band of brothers, brotherhood, of basically the man next to you and sharing that cold, wet, and misery, and the end result is a huge part of it.
We've been
for me
friends
as well.
since the very early 90s.
35 years, yeah. Natalie?
Yeah, the friendship indeed is really important. I think what drives me also is the fact that I consider that we are so privileged to decided to do that with our lives. I mean, it's a commitment, and each time I'm going on an expedition, I work on a project, I'm like, maybe we'll find something that is worth it sharing with all the people that will never have a chance. I mean, my parents are not diver at all. I mean, that scared them to death. And it's like, I think it's for all the people that will never have the chance or will never be willing. And I think like, they're missing so much. So it keeps me like having quest and trying to find answers just to be able to share, no matter the way we're going to share it with all the people. Yeah.
I totally agree. And point that Jill made from Bill Stone, it's exploration if you bring back data. And data can be photos, video, so you can share it with the broader audience. Jill?
I guess I'm still that little girl that loved show and tell in kindergarten. You know, look what I learned. So yeah, I'm with Nathalie in that regard. But especially now, when we look at humanity, people are retreating. Whether it's because of COVID or because of their devices, they're not going out and experiencing the world. And I think that those of us that explore, you know, want to encourage others to push the needle forward, to step into the darkness, to do something that scares them, perhaps, in as safe a way as possible, but to help solve those greater issues, those existential threats, climate change, water issues. And when I look back on the arc of my career and of my colleagues here too, there's a lot that's happened. I mean, I was the little girl that wanted to be an astronaut, and then I got to meet Bill Stone. I got to drive that first digital mapper that made a three-dimensional map inside a cave back in 1997. And that mapper has a launch date. It's going into space to map the ocean beneath Jupiter's moons. So if we are willing to get outside of our comfort and get cold and uncomfortable, and it might be horrible in the moment, when you look back, it's how we move society forward. It's discovery, it's learning through our successes and our failures, and sharing that helps others to explore.
Jarrod?
Well, now that I'm in my 30s, you know, looking back on the last 10 years, you're not buying that? I don't find it's really any different. To be honest, I feel the same way I did when I was in my 20s. I don't feel any diminishment. I've always had an intense sense of curiosity. I mean, whether that's riding a mountain bike trail that I've never been on before, I find it physically difficult to turn around. And I think that's the same with caves and wrecks and locations, that I've always just been so curious about what's there that I've always wanted to see around that corner. And then as Bill Stone would say, we're frustrated astronauts in the end of the day. And so since I can't get into space, I think I will continue doing this for many years to come. I'll try hard at least.
So taking that further, looking at progress. So when Scott and Amundsen first reached the South Pole, there was no map, there was no satellite, they had no idea where they were going other than keep going south. And things have changed. Now we've got a research base there that's inhabited 365 days a year. So over the decades you've been involved in exploration, how do you feel things have changed in underwater exploration in that time since you begun? And we'll swap it around and start with yourself, Jarrod.
Well, I mean, my talk tomorrow, I'm going to speak a little bit about some of these factors. There's probably never been a better time to get into this kind of activity. So if I think about how much more difficult so many things used to be, and now many of them are a lot easier, meaning the technology has enabled a lot of things that make it much easier for a variety of people to maneuver through the water much more efficiently and much more capably. So I've seen a big change in that regard. But at the same time, it's curious to me because fewer people seem interested in it. So and I don't know if that's just me, but I don't think so, because many of us have talked about this as well. I think there's so many competing interests and distractions that it's difficult for people to focus the time and energy required to get up to a very significant level. And for me, that's kind of sad, because it's never been easier, but yet fewer people seem interested. And it's hard to know what you're missing until you get into that setting. And 9 times out of 10, when I get set up, I'm thinking, wow, this is so much easier than it used to be. It's amazing. All the gear is lighter and smaller and burns forever. But I would say that's the biggest change I've seen, is that I don't see lots of people kind of coming in. I don't see the younger versions of ourselves in the sport.
Bill?
Yeah, I think, technology, access has changed. The gatekeepers, as you mentioned, are gone. You don't have to ask permission to be an explorer, an author, a filmmaker. You just go out and do it today. And a lot of young explorers are doing incredible things because no one ever told them they couldn't. And that's really exciting. But I think the other thing that's changing, though, is the access to the results. Like you said, we've made maps for others to follow. We've written handbooks for others to follow. But I feel a sense that there is now a paywall between that information and that data. And yet we're living at a time when we look at scientific exploration and we don't have the time for the traditional models of research, commissioning, and then peer review and writing and dissemination landing behind a paywall. Like, we're living in a time where we need legions of citizen scientists, citizens researchers to collaborate, work together, and share more widely, so we don't fall into that trap of not sharing the successes and the failures. That's so critically important to move us forward.
I think what you said is really important, the fact that we can, because of the technology, work together so fast. I mean, you can have a scientist having a question in a specific research, and then you can offer your help as a diver and go in the field, and everything within a couple of days. You just have to drive, put all your gear, the rebreather, the compressor, everything so fast. The tools are so compact that you don't need to have like a 20, 30, 40 people team, and it's more efficient, and then all the information can be shared so fast. So the technology is an enormous tool. And at the same time, sometimes like, I just hope it's not going to replace us. Because if it's going to replace us, and it's like, well, we're going to send a drone instead of a diver. Yes, we're going to see the images, but the perception we're going to have and we're going to be able to give to the others might not be there. And sometimes I feel that the more technology we are using, the more we rely on the technology and less we rely on us, and as a human, the weakness, the force we have, how are we going to evolve with that?
I think all of us here are of a generation where, if I'm right, we all started diving in the second half of the 80s, and when we started doing significant projects was early 90s to mid 90s. And you think of the equipment that we had then. And I look at my equipment now and I think, where the bloody hell was you when I needed you, Yeah. It's like, I remember going through shipwrecks with a QXL with 1 candle power of light. And now people can pass me on dives and just completely light up the shipwreck. And I'm like, wow, and where was this technology when we needed it? So I echo what you were saying. We're very lucky to be living in this time that we've got now. Now's never been a better time to explore a shipwreck or a cave, and now's really good for the safety side of it as well. Things have changed safety-wise. I mean, when we were going through that period of exploration in the 90s, we were all losing friends. Yeah, it doesn't happen so much now because the training's so good, the equipment is so good. And I'll tell you what else is really, really good that's changed, I think. Imagery, the photography. The world we're living in now is saturated with images of what people are doing out there that's so cool, it's off the scale, isn't it, you know? I've recently been working on a writing project where I need images from the first half of the 90s. I just can't find them. There's such a lack of it, isn't there? I don't know about you guys. If I was to say to you, have you got images from that project you did, I could phone somebody up and try and get some for you. But now there's so, you know, you've only got to look through your social media feed when you're having your breakfast and go, you know, I look at Stefan Panis's images and go, wow, look at how cool are those in the mines, and just everybody. I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but it's a fantastic world we're living in for diving right now, and I think because of images. Those cameras as well, when I first started taking pictures of shipwrecks, there was 3 of us, and I couldn't really talk to those other guys. One of them was Brad Sheard in America, and another one was a guy called Antonello Paoni in Rome. And, you know, I just didn't, it was a film camera, and people just didn't take me serious because I wanted to shoot pictures deeper than 100 meters. But now, the technology, I've got friends that I dive with that have got, you know, Nikon Z9s and things like that are burning apertures of, ISOs rather, of 20,000 that are getting pictures of shipwrecks that 20 years ago would have, you know, you couldn't have made it up, could you really? I don't know if you agree, guys, you know. But the technology in imagery, I think, is changed as well. And that goes back to what you're saying, data. Didn't you say Bill Stone said
data,
the difference between adventure and exploration is coming back with data, isn't it?
Data.
Maybe you could expand on what he said there, but you know, the imagery, what we're getting now is, am I waffling now? Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. We'll cut you out.
Yeah,
you're a good waffler.
Sorry, guys.
I've known you forever. So another example of exploration is the early Apollo missions, the moon landings. And those moon landings involved 3 people that went into space. And of those 3, only 2 landed on the moon. But behind those 3 people were hundreds of team members that made that possible, without whom it would have been impossible. Every expedition I've been on, each person, from the person who makes the coffee you desperately need when you get out because you're cold, right up to the push explorer, is essential to the success. So the next question is, how important do you find team selection is, or do you just fill spaces? And if you find it important, how do you select your teams? So, Jarrod.
Yeah, it's critical. I mean, that was one of the first things we identified in our late 80s and early 90s, is that team members were a critical component to success, because sophisticated missions can be done with a couple people, but to really do them efficiently when you're also trying to do good science, good documentation, where you're trying to really wrap up the proper form of a project, really includes a team, everybody from data processing all the way through safety divers and equipment people to keep everyone safe and happy and warm and fed. So critical. And also the flavor of an expedition can be warped rapidly by, you know, even one person who's not a team player or who is not oriented in a particular way, a very selfish kind of personality. So it's critical to have enough people for the mission on hand, and so many people stand behind any successful endeavor. There's usually dozens, if not hundreds of people behind that. And those people deserve usually much more recognition than the people that tend to get it. But then I find that just that one person who goes off can really cause everybody to go into conniptions. So we're very careful about the kind of personalities we choose. Have to be pretty easygoing, team player, pretty flexible, pretty friendly, and it can't be all about your own ego and what you want to do. Those are, I think, 2 very critical parts.
Yeah, I think for me, early on in expeditions and in filmmaking, we always focused on getting, you know, the very best cameraman or the very best practitioner of a particular skill you needed. And I learned pretty quickly that, you know, if you're going to be in the field for 2, 3, 4 months, you want to hang around with cool people that are easy to get along with. But you also want to ensure that not everybody's focused on the diving mission and the sexiest role. You want people that aren't going to walk past the sink full of dirty dishes. You know, you want people that are generalists in a way. They might not be the very best practitioner of a particular skill, but they have the other skills that are really important. And overall, the entire team has to have the mindset that they're willing to spend their life savings. They're willing to, spend all the money that's commissioned a project and get to within about a hair's breadth of what they perceive as complete success. And as they're reaching for the gold, go, oh, no, not today. We need to turn around. We need to abort. And then you need to know that all of those people are going to support that decision. And I think that's really critical for me in building a team today.
Nathalie?
I think when you can trust your team, no matter what's going to happen, that they're going to watch your back and you're going to watch their back, that even as a leader, which can be a tricky position in an expedition, you are there for them, and same thing. And I remember when I did one of my projects, I said the team is as strong as the weakest person in the team. And sometimes you don't know where the weakness is going to show up. It's maybe some technical skills. It must be something emotional because we're facing a situation in which we didn't know that person was going to react that way. So for me, it's really important to know the others, to make sure I can count on them. They can count on me, and we can have the openness that there's no ego there. The ego stay outside of the expedition, and we're all in this together. And no matter what's going to happen, we're going to succeed. Maybe we're going to have to come back, but at the end of the day, at the end of the expedition, it will be a learning experience from which every single team member will take something out of it.
I think what I'll talk about is not so much in terms of a big expedition, but say we're going out a specific weekend to explore a certain shipwreck, and say we haven't got enough people to fill the boat or something like that. So I'm going to ring up somebody and I'm going to ask them to come and join us for the day. And I say, the shipwreck is 60 meters deep, okay? And the person says to me, yeah, I'm up for that. If I say it's 80 meters deep, and they say, I'm not sure about that, I'd rather just give me a call if it's 60 meters. That person knows their limitations. So to me, that goes a long way. A diver that actually realistically understands their limitations, what they're comfortable with, to fit in with the team and do that. And we do have a few people come along, say we organise a wreck dive that's 100 metres, 50 miles offshore. Somebody comes along and they say they can do it, but realistically, they've never done it before, they just want to do it. And you can tell they're nervous. When they're loading the boat, they haven't got much of a conversation because their mind's elsewhere. So you know when somebody's ready for the job. So I think that's a big thing. Reliability is a big thing as well. If somebody's going to turn up, be part of the training, be part of the team. You asked Stefan Panis the answer to the question, it's beer, is that right? But going back, I just got a little bit of a story. Going back to what you were saying, this triggered off this question with the space landings, didn't it? Yeah, and the Apollo years. Yeah, so I'm in Texas like you do. And I think, oh, while I'm here, I'll go to NASA and I'll get one of those tours around the NASA place, yeah? So I've walked in NASA on my own, and I go to the reception, the woman's on the phone, and she put the phone down, she went, oh, you here for the tour? And I thought, well, yeah, I'm here for a tour, I don't know about the tour. She said, oh, can you go and sit in the corner there with those other two guys? What I didn't know is those other two guys were on a really serious VIP tour, which the public just couldn't get. So I went and sat with them, and I'd been there for about 2 minutes. Some guy come through the door and he said, oh, you're here for the VIP tour? I didn't say anything, I just thought I'd go along with it, you know. Anyway, this VIP tour included dinner with the astronauts in the restaurant and a tour of all the places that the public would never normally go. I didn't pay for anything, it was great, you know. But
that is so you.
Oh no, it's me, isn't it?
Yeah, it's you.
But they took us in, they've got I don't know if you know, they've got 3 different mission controls. So they've got one that operates the International Space Station. They've got another one that does the shuttle. And they've got another one, which is the historic one from the 60s, where they did all the original mission, the Apollo missions and things like that. And they took us in there, and they showed, the guide showed us by the entranceway, there was a water fountain where the people that worked there could go and get a drink, just by the water fountain. And above it was this tiny little mirror, about 5 inches by 5 inches. And the guy said that was the present that the astronauts from the Apollo 13 mission gave to the people of mission control. I said, what, that tiny little mirror? And he said, yes. And the reason being is because when every single one of those people from mission control look in that mirror, they see the real heroes of the Apollo 13 rescue and thing. I thought that was so cool.
That's very cool.
And like you said, it's the people behind, the team behind, that are the real heroes that make it happen.
Yeah.
A little bit of a story there.
That's a good story. I think you can take it a step further, because although Apollo 13's mission was a failure, bringing them home alive was one of their greatest successes. So that's even more pertinent. They shared that with their team that did that for them.
Yeah.
So the next area is risk. What we do, what all of you guys do as diving, has risk. We are not yet aquatic, although Deep would like to make that happen. But even there, that won't involve breathing water. We will still be underwater by means of equipment, technique, skills, and dedication. So Xavier's talk this morning was an absolutely fantastic example of that. It's like watching that beautiful film, going, wow, this is an incredible cave, right up to that point where things tipped over the edge, risk reared its ugly head, and things started to go wrong that were then handled, ending up with a healthy Xavier joining us today. So there's 2 parts to my next question. How do you, when running a team, when organising an expedition, mitigate risk? Because it's impossible to remove all of it. And the second part, much to Gareth's request for the last 10 years, you don't have to, but if any of you feel you have a event story from one of your expeditions where things didn't go right, that we, the audience, could learn from, that would be a great add to the question. So, Leigh, do you want to go first on this one?
Why do I always go first?
You don't.
You don't always go first. We've been trading back and forth, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So mitigating risk. If this was a profession, what we did, I'm talking from what I do now, deep shipwreck diving, I don't think you'd be allowed to do it. There'd be no risk assessment that allows you to do what you do, because it is risky. And I echo what you said about Xavier's video there. Whoever edited that together and put that is just, that's one of the best films I've seen for a long time. Had me on the edge. True exploration, and the images are bringing back the data, aren't they? That was off the scale exploration. That's so cool. Risk. So what we do as a team, because we are diving off a relatively small boat, it's a private boat, although we'll do 100 miles offshore and a wreck deeper than 100 meters, we use a system of the drop bottle system. So we carry enough gas to get us back up to 50 meters depth. And I'll tell you, that gas is not going to last long. It's easy for people to sit there and work out the math and say that'll get you from there to there. But the truth is, if you have a complete catastrophic rebreather failure, the shit hits the fan, and you breathe about 3 times that, what the maths probably tell you. And those cylinders are not going to last you long. But I carry 2 that gets me up to that 50-meter range. And then I'm relying on, the whole team is reliant on the boat surface team dropping down drop sets. Now, I know you've experimented with that, Jarrod, but your philosophy is also to take in enough gas for you guys to complete the dive, isn't it?
As a general rule, yes. So as we discussed the other night, it just depends a little bit on the team and the mix and the likelihood of separation and how good the surface crews are. So I've done both, and I'm comfortable doing both under certain circumstances. But ideally, the team for us would carry enough gas, at least in the team, So that might be even a mixed bailout strategy in the more common scenario.
So it's a practice that we use and we've put into practice in the past and it works. So I'll answer the second part of the question if you want to carry on with that.
Yeah, we
part
can
with
do that.
risk,
We'll go through the risk assessment
and then I'll come
back to the stories.
any incidents or anything that's happened
Yeah.
and any lessons learned from that, yeah?
Cool, yeah. So, Nathalie, how do you... Yes, yeah.
If I take, for example, the one we're doing in the crater, so we were far away from the hyperbaric chamber, and even if something was going wrong, maybe because of the weather anyway, we couldn't get access to the chopper, it couldn't land, and we'll be in bad situation. So what we decided to do, we were 2 divers going deep, and on the 50% O2 decompression stop, we had 1 diver coming with extra gas, just in case we had an issue, and removing some of the tanks we will not use. So we had really a redundancy and safety team on the boat. 1 safety diver coming towards us just to see, okay, how it goes, if there's any problem, because the water temperature is 4 Celsius degree, and just to assess the situation. And even before the dive, it was really a lot of things regarding weather check, talking to the organization with the chopper. Okay, this is the plan, this is the exact location, this is the time we're going to go in the water, this is the time we're supposed to get out of the water. So if we don't call you before that time, we're all good. And because we had to put in place a lot of specific protocols because of the latest time they could take off and that kind of stuff. So for us, it's really 2 divers going deep, 1 safety diver, 1 standby diver on the boat, and 1 captain on the boat. Yeah.
I'll talk a little more philosophically on whether it's a simple dive or a big dive. I have a little bit of a ritual. So before I go in the water, I'm mentally thinking through everything that could go wrong today with my gear, with my partner, with the location, and I'm kind of ticking off that list in my head. And I'm even sort of sometimes, physically going through the manual, actions of, can I still reach that valve? Well, if this happens, I'm going to need to reach that. So I go through that list in my head just to remind myself that I have the skills, I have the gear, I have the right people. But right before I go underwater, I ask myself, am I capable of self-rescue today in this situation with this partner? Am I also capable and willing to execute a buddy rescue, my responsibility to my partner or my team today in this situation? And sometimes the answer is no, so I don't dive. But if the answer is yes, the last thing I do is I sort of compartmentalize and I leave the emotions, the stress, everything of everyday life on the surface, and I go underwater. And then when something startling happens, the big boom or some incident, your heart races, your respirations go up, and the chattering monkeys are racing around in your brain. I just take that deep breath and I remind myself that I got this. I already told myself this. I already rehearsed this. And then I take the emotions out of my head quite visually and I set them on a little shelf and I say, I'll come back to you later, but right now you're not going to help me. Emotions, you will not serve me well right now. And then I don't even focus on getting out of the cave. I don't even focus on the big picture, the success. I think about what's the next best choice I can make. And that's the best you can do. So I think that's really my philosophical, look at risk and how I deal with it in a situation.
Jarrod?
For me, I've always been a big believer in trying to remove as many of the risks as I could as a general principle. I know we all, I think, philosophically try to do that. What we've tried to do is build standardized approach and standardized procedures that are more rigid in proportion to the risk that we see. So for example, something like switching to a hyperoxic mix at the wrong depth is something that killed a lot of our friends and our associates over many years. And so when you see something like that that's quite frequent and common, then we have to have a very rigid and very focused and then ultimately institutionalized approach to managing that problem, which means that we need to try our best to try to develop the society that doesn't tolerate laziness or being slack about something like that. Because there are certainly some rules that are easier to bend a little bit, and there are some that are easier to get killed when you bend a little bit. So that, I think, has been a big focus from my perspective through time. But then there is variability, right, in the environment and our activities in different scenarios, and there always needs to be that evaluation process that Jill is talking about. And to amplify on Leigh's question about, for example, the gases you carry, we have a preferred strategy, which is that independently I can comfortably ascend with open circuit gas, even on a complete failure of my rebreather. That's how I would like to dive, because then everything's fine. I've got everything is as safe and warm and fuzzy as possible. But then at some point, the logistics of some dives due to depth or distance or whatever have you might be to the point where that much gas starts to become a risk unto itself, because now the task loading and the challenges, problems associated, or maybe the mission requires too much work to allow for that. And so then we start to say, okay, now then in this given situation, let's say I have enough to get me to the surface alive, but not necessarily comfortably. And then as a team, we have enough gas to get one of us to the surface very comfortably with our normal decompression. And then a third strategy is the one that Leigh articulated, which is one I'm comfortable with, but I have then to have a very comprehensive and capable team, because if I'm going to count on the boat above me to get me gas in potentially rough conditions, then I need to have a high degree of confidence. So I would say, just in summary, the solid platform that minimizes the number of those kinds of variable decisions I need to make, especially with critical things like switching to another gas. Those have to be solid and not debatable. And then other things need to maintain a little bit of variability. And what I like to encourage people to do is to build their experience in a progressive fashion so that it's easier for you to identify the difference. And that's one risk to all the technology that we have, is it's quite easy to get far and deep really quickly. But if you don't build up any experience and have a couple trips from time to time, then that trip may be a fatality instead of just a scary moment.
And any stories where it didn't quite go right that relate to risk? Leigh, you had one.
Well, yeah, and I'll echo what those two said there in terms of mitigating the risk long before you even get to the dive site. So I also now, as I'm getting older and a bit more wiser, methodically go through my equipment and manage the what-ifs. So I can prevent lots of things happening long before I even get to the dive site by making sure my bailout's working, my rebreather's perfect, everything, yeah? So I get there and I think to myself, it doesn't even cross my mind that I'm going to die. Why would you? You shouldn't even be in the game if that's the case, should it? I've been on the boat a few times where we've come back to shore with one less diver because they simply haven't surfaced from the dive. I've gone back a few times, a couple of days later, to look for that person, and we haven't found them. The tide, because the waters I dive in are seriously tidal, and the tide will just sweep a body away. But when you're down there, you're looking for somebody, it's not nice. It stinks of death, it's just not. I mean, I've seen a lot of death in my job as a firefighter, but when you're looking for somebody that but even worse, when somebody dies that is really super close to you. So your friends that you go diving with don't come home, don't come back. And I'll openly talk about it a little bit, but there was an occasion, it was 2009, we got an expedition to Britannic, Titanic sister ship. And this expedition was huge. And what it was supposed to do, what we were doing, we were filming for National Geographic, and Robert Ballard was out filming on Titanic, and the two were going to be linked together. So we would be exploring inside Britannic, and it was going to be a 2-hour special documentary to kick off a series of expeditions on National Geographic Television. So intelligent programming that was going to be a 2-hour special. So my best friend Carl Spencer put the expedition together, and one of the most impressive things that we ever saw was a connection, a colour that Jarrod and Casey had made together. And I just said to Carl, we've got to get these guys over to get inside Britannic and lay this line so we can get in and get the photographs.
I think you used the words like rats to cheese or something like
okay.
that.
I used the words of let's get these guys in and send them in like little rats to find the inside bits for us to photograph. And it was quite a big plan. And to cut a long story short, on that very first dive, Carl died. My best friend died. So that day he sat on that boat and he didn't come back. I sit on the boat every dive, and I do think to myself, well, I've got everything in place, but I never think to myself, I might not come home from that dive. I never think like that. And everybody that's been lost on a boat or a cave dive or whatever never thinks like that, but something goes wrong on the day, and that frightens me a little bit. So what happened on that day? Well, Carl developed a problem with his rebreather. And as a result of that, on the Britannic, he had to bail out. So he bailed out onto his open circuit cylinders. He came up the line. I think it was about 50 meters. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he transferred to another cylinder of gas, and then had an oxygen toxicity hit, had a seizure, spat his mouthpiece out, and basically drowned there and then. The support diver had no other option to send him to the surface. Now, I didn't see this because I wasn't diving with him. I was diving with another person. So I didn't see this happen. So I didn't know he was dead until I got to the surface. And Jarrod was surface support that day, wasn't you? And Jarrod personally supported me on that dive, but he chose not to tell me. I think I had 5 hours of decompression to do, and I did it without knowing. So I surfaced, and I thought something was a bit unusual, because normally, when you're making a television documentary, the camera crews are there waiting for you to get your first reaction as soon as you take your mask off. So there was no cameras there, and Richie Kohler come up to me and he just put his arm around me. He said, we've lost Carl. And he'd been helicoptered off before I'd even reached the surface, and he was dead. So it was me that had to make the phone call to his family, and it was me that saw the ramifications of what happens, and it hits home quite hard. Now, why did he have an oxygen toxicity hit? I'll pass you over to Jarrod, who probably can explain a little bit more of how he did that and what measures we'd put into place to stop that happening and how it happened.
Sure, and this actually speaks to the point about the different mixtures and switching to the wrong mix at the wrong depth. And I've lost quite a few friends in the sport, and I've spent a lot of time looking at those fatalities in particular, and really any fatality that comes forward. I think most of us are always trying to understand, is this something that we could have done better? And on that particular day, I had seen that some of the bottles that were to be used as safety bottles, emergency deployment bottles, were not clearly marked. Carl had actually asked me, I said, can I help? I'm not diving today. I already did a setup yesterday. What can I do? And he said, well, can you go make sure those bottles are squared away? And I went over and looked, and I couldn't personally identify some of them in a way that made me comfortable. So I asked him, is it okay if I bring him? And if he was very enthusiastic and said, that's one of the reasons we asked you to come, please do whatever you want. So we re-rigged all 9 safety bottles to a very exacting set of standards, very clear exactly what was in every bottle. And they were meant to be 3 drop lines with 3 bottles on each line, so different teams could come up those lines. But because we hadn't institutionalized that process among everybody, because you had a wide diversity of different people in the group with different kinds of approaches, that wasn't broad enough. And so one of the safety divers was asked at the last minute, here, can you put this bottle in the water? Which wasn't part of the approved, coded, and marked bottles, but the safety diver hadn't been educated as a broad group, and this is one of the problems with kind of mixing and matching teams that don't have the same culture and history and identifications. And this air bottle that was a duct tape that said air on it wasn't in fact air, and so that ultimately led to Carl's death. And I think most of us have had enough of those kind of similar experiences that we can call on, that every time something like that happens, it hits you in the gut, and you have to really say, okay, what can we do differently? Is that enough for what you had, Leigh? Good.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah.
I think Jill's got a point on this.
Well, these kinds of discussions are supposed to be a bit spicy, I suppose. And I wasn't there, and we all loved Carl, but he screwed up. I mean, and this happens in the social, cultural hierarchy, right? Sometimes the expedition leader, filmmaker, the leader is looked at on top. You have to develop a culture for that unsafe. You have to be in the water for a long time to work. You need to be okay. So I think it was a failure of the hierarchy. I think that's why that expeditions are too. Filmmakers try too. We need to see something.
And I think Jill's point is an excellent one, because Leigh and I were just discussing it, and so that's the direct reason that Carl lost his life, and that's the easy thing to point to. In fact, it's true, that is the reason that he lost his life, but there's a cascading series of events that came well before that, so I'm glad that you bring this forward. We talked about trying to tease this out, and you've done it well. Thanks for the spice. So Carl was diving a borrowed dry suit. He was diving a borrowed rebreather. He hadn't been in the water in a long time. He drowned because the bottle was marked wrong and he breathed the wrong gas, but he would have never probably gone on the bottle had those other pieces not been in place. So it doesn't excuse the bottle, but it's too easy to point at the bottle and say, that's it, mark it properly, everybody's safe. And that's not the case. And I think that, Gareth and many others are bringing forward many times that bringing these points out and talking about these things openly is so critical, because we really need to create a culture where anybody can challenge somebody. And we try to do that, but authority being what it is, that's sometimes difficult.
We've just had the 5-minute warning from Arlindo, so I'm going to...
Not up here, I was waiting for the blinking red numbers.
I'm going to pause this one there and just go for one last quick one for basically whistle round for the crew, because I think it's important. So now we're looking at dives in the 300-meter range. We're looking at dives in the multiple kilometer penetration range. So what's next? How do we evolve? We're close to the limits of human capabilities, as we've learned this morning from the presentations on deep diving. If we go much further horizontally, our bottom time is going to put us into saturation, not just close to it. So where do you think exploration is going to go next, and how? So you can go first on this one.
Bring on the robots. I mean,
No, no, wrong answer.
We've got to touch the frontier.
Get this woman off the stage.
Yeah. Who invited you?
I'm not intimidated by technology. I want to integrate technology, but my biggest dream is to swim an exosuit into the unknown.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fine, but that's not a robot. That's you inside technology.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was very lucky to meet Phil Newton just before he passed away, and I'm a pilot on his suit, and his dream was to make literally a carbon fiber suit that was built on you, so you look like Iron Man, and you can swim to the bottom of the sea. So the technology is not impossible. Maybe that's where we end up.
Well, I like that a lot, actually. So sign me up. I'm good for that. And I think, to answer your question, a lot of the things that are happening, it's never been more exciting either, because you don't have to go the deepest in the water or the furthest in a cave to have an amazing adventure and to realize tremendous productive accomplishments. many of the areas in the world that people have never been diving before or don't have really well developed technical communities. I mean, I'll talk tomorrow about Indonesia, for example, where there are just dives everywhere, where you can sometimes be the first one in the water. There's many places around the world to go where you don't have to go very deep, where you don't have to do anything spectacular. In any case, you can still have an amazing time even if you're not exploring.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's going to go. Far and wide with technology support, sign us up.
I agree. Well, we've been given time, so I just want to thank my 4 friends for such an engaging conversation. Thank you guys for listening, and thanks to Arlindo for another wonderful diving talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please don't leave the stage, and please don't stand up. I would like to invite all the speakers to go to the stage. Jill has something to do again. One more thing, right? I need a yes, thank you, from you. So I please invite all the speakers to go to the stage. Yeah. Every one of you to go there.
Yeah, that's announced. Yeah, it did. Good.
So this will be
Okay.
another special moment after such an incredible debate about the exploration. So thank you so much to all of you. And now, Jill, please.
Sure. I mean, I know we already said our good wishes to Michael, but we want to do one more from all of us, and just to everyone in the crowd, just how important collaborations are and communications are. I remember meeting Michael Menduno in the middle of the Mexican jungle back in 1995, I think. And, you know, since then, all of us have worked together and also benefited from his great communication out into the world then and now. So thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for collaborating today, and thank you, Arlindo, for bringing us together at such an important meeting where we can look to the future and share the lessons of the past.
Perfect. Cool.